Do threats and punishments solve our problems? How do we deal with difficult people? How do we build our people skills? A Harvard psychologist has written a pivotal book on achieving satisfying relationships, and it's more than just being nice. This is New England Authors. Our guest today is Dr. Stuart Ablon. He is the director of Think Kids in the Department of Psychiatry at Mass General Hospital and associate clinical professor of psychology at the Harvard Medical Center. Welcome to the show. And you've written this very interesting book called Changeable. And if I was to sum up this book, which I read from cover to cover, I was to sum it up in a sentence. Kindness and understanding are more effective in changing people than reward and punishment. Is that a good one sentence?
I was eager to hear. I'm always asked to summarize it. It's nice to have somebody else summarize it for once.
Yeah.
I like your summary.
Okay.
I think that's accurate. The only thing I guess I would add is the reason for that is because behavior is determined by skill, not will. And I think that's a crucial piece for people to take away from this book.
Right. You talk a lot about that. What's the difference between reward and punishment and the other kindness and understanding? How do you...
Sure. Well, I think it all goes back to how people understand when somebody is behaving in a way that they wish they weren't. And
yeah, I could relate to that, right?
Everybody can relate to that. You know, I've studied kids and adolescents in homes and schools and treatment settings and things like that for a long time. But this book really is extending the lessons learned to all walks of life, because we all experience this, whether it's in our workplace, in our family, in our relationships. You know, people behave in ways that we're not so wild about. They do things we don't want them to do, or don't do things we want them to do, and the same is for us. You know, so. But the way most people tend to understand behavior is that if somebody's not meeting an expectation of someone else's, that they must not be sort of trying hard enough to do it.
Yeah.
And that sets in motion all these reward and punishment interventions, which are really just aimed around making it more incentive, providing more incentive for somebody to behave well, which works great if the only thing getting in the person's way is they're simply not trying hard enough. But that's just not true.
You cite a lot of examples in your book, and you start with, was it the Oregon State Hospital?
Yes.
Which you said was where One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest was filmed.
Yes.
And apparently it used to be like the film, and the staff were regularly used restraints on people, staff were injured or threatened, and then they sat down and they tried something different. Can you just tell us that story?
I mean, the first thing to know is, well, the Oregon State Hospital is one of the largest state psychiatric hospitals in the United States, and it's a tough place with a very tough patient population. But it's really not any different from lots of therapeutic settings for kids, adolescents, adults, in that when people, again, misbehave, people tend to apply reward and punishment programs to try to change their behavior. And what happens when somebody lacks the skill to manage their behavior effectively, and people are just lording rewards and punishments over them all the time, it not only doesn't work, it just fans the flames. And so they got in touch with us because it wasn't working, and staff were getting assaulted, patients were getting hurt, all kinds of things, and they wanted a different approach. And we teach a very different approach that starts with a very different understanding of why people are behaving this way, but then a very different system of what to do instead.
Okay, so tell us, what was it? What did you do?
Sure, well, you summed it up as sort of a kindness and understanding.
Kindness and understanding.
But it's more than that. It's really, first of all, it is starting from an empathic standpoint of thinking the best out of somebody. You know, the philosophy we apply is it goes like this: it's people do well if they can. Not people do well if they want to, but people do well if they can. And what people do well if they can is meant to suggest is, you know what, if you could do well, you would do well. If I could do well, I would do well. And if I'm not doing so well in some way, something's getting in the way, let's try to figure out what, so we can help in a compassionate way. So that's the philosophy that we taught them to apply at the Oregon State Hospital. But then we also equipped them with some sort of concrete tools. And then I want to be clear, they're not techniques, because there's no magic technique you can apply to somebody. Really, they're sort of guideposts for how to collaborate effectively. And really, it's going to sound very simple. But what we taught people to do is, if somebody's not doing what you want, listen first.
Listen, right.
Ask a lot of questions. Reflect what you've heard. Make sure you hear the person accurately, and check in with them. If you really get them and they say, yeah, that's where I'm coming from. Those are my concerns, my perspective. And only once you do that, once you've heard the other person out, do you move to what we call our second ingredient of the process, which is, then I get to share my perspective, my concerns, what I'm worried about. So, take you to the Oregon State Hospital. I'm going to hear the patient out first.
So
as to why
listen first.
Listen first, then I'm going to explain what I'm worried about. I'm not going to impose a solution, but I'm going to explain what I'm worried about. And the reason I'm doing this with my hands is, this is how you know you're doing the process. It's not just their concern or my concern.
I see.
It's both. And only once we have both sets of concerns on the table do you move to the third and final ingredient of this process, which we, by the way, call collaborative problem solving. And you invite the other person to problem solve with you. And you give them first crack at it, too. You say, let's see if we can come up with some ideas together. Do you have any ideas that would address both of our concerns and are realistic and doable? And what they found with this in the Oregon State Hospital, and I do start the book off with, I think, what's a pretty powerful example of it, is they found that they were able to get patients to adhere to the treatment program much more effectively. But instead of by imposing their will, by collaborating with them. And the patients all of a sudden had a sense of autonomy and ownership and buy-in. But the other thing that was happening is, in these discussions, you build a lot of relationship, and both interaction partners have to practice a whole bunch of skills that go into humans solving problems together in the first place.
You say that people don't mean to be bad. We don't necessarily have the tools to change, and this is what you're emphasizing. What are these skills?
Well, again, most people tend to assume that compliance or behaving well is simply a choice. It's only a choice if you have the skills in the first place. And the skills I'm talking about broadly are things like flexibility, frustration tolerance, and problem-solving skills. And people who exhibit challenging behavior on a chronic basis struggle with those skills. I want to be clear, though, this process I'm talking about didn't come out of nowhere. It's come out of probably now a quarter century of working with people, especially kids and adolescents, who exhibit extremely challenging behavior, highly explosive, defiant, oppositional kids, and studying them. And what did we find? We find that it's not that they're not working hard to behave well. In fact, they actually work harder than other people.
I see.
Because it doesn't come naturally to them. What I tell people is, you can think of it like a learning disability. Except instead of like reading and math and writing, this is areas like flexibility, frustration tolerance, problem solving. So these are folks who are struggling with skills in those types of areas.
Right.
And just to connect the dots from other things we've discussed here, rewards and punishments don't work because they don't help build skills. It's not their fault. Like we shouldn't blame reward and punishment programs. We're using them for the wrong things. They're great to motivate people, but if motivation is not the problem, if neurocognitive skills, thinking skills are the problem, of course they're not going to work.
This is New England Authors. But rewards is different than punishment.
Well, they're flip side of the same coin.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, people tend to think they're being kinder. I have people in schools all the time tell me, we're not punitive. We only use rewards here. If kids behave well, they get, good behavior Friday. And what I say is, well, what if they don't behave well? Well, then they don't get good behavior Friday. Well, guess what I call that? a punishment.
Oh, I see. Yes, that's a good way. We're speaking with Stuart Ablon. He's clinical professor of psychology at the Harvard Medical Center. Written several books here. We're concentrating on this one called Changeable. And why did you put the period in between change and able? It's like,
well, we're trying to emphasize that change is about ability to change. And in fact, we are all able to change if we can build the skills you need to change. Again, change is not about willpower. It's a lovely idea that we have, that if you just try hard enough, you can change anything. It's not quite true. It's, you know, the saying, where there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah.
I like to say, where there's a will and a skill, there's a way.
Yeah.
So we're all able to change, but it's about building our abilities in the first place.
So you've worked a lot with kids. A lot of your other books are about children here. I want to talk about them a little bit later. Is working with kids different than working with adults?
No. No.
Just small adults?
Well, you know, it's one of the reasons I wrote Changeable, is that I was finding over the years that everything we talk about with kids applies to adults as well. You know, just because I'm middle-aged doesn't mean that I have good skills when it comes to problem-solving, flexibility, and frustration tolerance. And every single one of us, we've got our strengths and we've got our weaknesses. You know, regardless of age, there's always things we're working on.
Right.
And the other thing I've found of late is I have a lot of people who learn about our work, and they instantly say to themselves, whether it's themselves, their parents, their grandparents, they also see as we age that some of these abilities in these areas start to disappear on us as well. And the very same approach that's helpful for kids who are struggling with these skills is helpful with adults struggling with these skills.
That's interesting to hear. You talk about the Youth Correctional Facility in Maine. We have a lot of viewers in Maine. Tell us the example you give and what happened.
Well, in Maine, going back many years ago, a colleague and I were working there and really trying to help them rethink what their role was. You know, correctional facilities, again, people think the role is to correct. And what we were helping people see is, you know, these are youth who've got some delays in skills. And we've got to shift your job description here. Your job description is trying to partner with these youth, build relationships, and help them develop skills. And what they found over the course of, you know, it took about 5 years to really reform their system and implement collaborative problem solving. They had a massive drop in recidivism rates. So rates of return to their facilities, 1 year rates of return. You know, I think the rate when we first started was a little north of about 60%.
Yeah.
So just to put this in context, like 6 out of 10 kids were back within a year. I mean, the staff used to say, you know, we don't say goodbye to kids, we say see you soon. It's like a revolving door. And by the time those 5 years were done, due to the incredibly hard work of the staff there and really changing culture and practice, I think they were down to about 12.5% rates of return within a year.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think that's what you said in your book.
That's dramatic. And, you know,
that's very dramatic.
And when you think about the cost savings for our public systems, enormous. And of course, what I'm most concerned about is just I mean, it's really saving lives because, you know, if you maintain a correctional mentality in these programs, what we have is we have people who are going to be spending their lives in these programs.
Now, you're talking about a lot of difficult people, I think, right?
Well, I don't even like that, to be honest, that description.
Oh,
difficult
I'm sorry.
people.
Yeah, you're right.
We wouldn't call somebody who struggles to read difficult. We'd call them somebody who struggles to read.
Yeah.
These people are people who are struggling with skills as well.
But particular people in a correctional facility are more difficult.
Well, and look, if you look at folks who end up in first our juvenile justice system and then our adult correctional system, by and large, those are folks who've been exposed to trauma, who've been exposed to chronic, overwhelming stress in their lives. And one of the things we've learned now that we can image the brain, we can peer into the brain, is we see that when you're exposed to trauma and abuse, neglect, chronic stress, stressors of things like poverty, homelessness, food insecurity, when you're exposed to those things over the course of development, it affects your brain. And one of the ways it affects your brain is it delays the development of skills in areas like flexibility, frustration tolerance, and problem solving. And those are, by and large, most of the folks who are populating these programs.
Yeah.
Which is why, again, a big part of our work, of my work, is trying to help people see the true nature of the problem so that we can have empathy for people who are struggling with their behavior.
Yeah. Can you also relate this to, say, marriage situations or
You can relate it to anywhere that two or more people are not seeing eye to eye and have a problem to solve.
So listen,
express your
and
concern,
then express your concern.
try to collaborate. And look, I think in romantic relationships, oftentimes some of our breakdowns are around what I call dueling solutions. Two people with two different solutions to a problem trying to convince each other we should do it this way, we should do it this way.
Right.
And our work is about, hold on a second, you know what, you may not like the other person's solutions, but I bet they have good concerns behind those solutions.
I see.
Let's try to unpack their concerns. And then, same for you though, don't just share your solution. Let's hear your concerns that have led you to those solutions. And you often find common ground then and opportunities to collaborate that may not look like this solution or this solution, but are aimed at addressing both people's concerns.
Interesting. Okay.
And if you can do this in a psychiatric hospital where One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, was based,
Yes.
if you can do this in correctional facilities, you can do it in your home with your partner. You can do it in the workplace. You can do it with your own kids. I don't think there's anybody who you can't apply this process to. It's not magic, and I'm sorry, it's not applying the process to them, it's applying the process with them.
I was wondering when I was reading your book, you talk about this as being personal. Can this be applied to nations as well, nation states?
I was about to say that before. I said anywhere where two people or more are in conflict, have a disagreement. Absolutely, it can be applied on the world stage. Absolutely. And again, I think one of the problems is that it's very similar to what I just described in couples.
Yeah.
We have visceral, strong responses to somebody else's proposed solution, and we vilify them based upon that. And what we really ought to do is try to get, again, behind their solution that we may not be wild about, to search for their good concern. And one of the things I've learned is there, believe it or not, is a foolproof way of getting other people to listen to you. And people say this to me all the time, but what if they don't want to listen? There is a foolproof way. And it's not rocket science. You want somebody to listen to you?
Yeah.
Listen to them. If you listen really hard to somebody and bite your tongue on your thoughts, perspectives, point of view, reactions, just listen. If you do that, and then you pause, and you try to say something to them, they'll be much more likely to listen to you. But I don't think we humans are wonderful at listening.
If you're just joining us, we're speaking with Stuart Ablon. He's a professor of psychology at the Harvard Medical School. And we were talking about his book, Changeable. But I want to talk a little about your other books here. Collaborative problem solving. What's that about?
Well, this one's a bit more clinical, but really what it is, it's an edited book where a lot of my colleagues contributed to the book based upon their experience implementing collaborative problem solving, which is the name of our approach, in all kinds of different places.
Right.
Hospitals, residential treatment facilities, workplaces, schools. There's a chapter in there where we talk about looking through a neurodevelopmental lens, applying the approach, and how it's what we call trauma-informed, and how it helps operationalize, how you would help somebody recover from trauma. So, this is a book that has chapters based upon different settings and our experience in the last 10 to 15 years working with all kinds of organizations.
I have a problem when I see people on the sidewalk begging for change. I don't know what to do. And I think it's a problem that a lot of us have. You know, a couple of times I've engaged people. I've sat down and said, "Oh, what's your story?" And that's been kind of interesting. But I don't do that very often. And what should one do in that situation?
Well, gosh, I don't know that I have the answer to that, other than to say that, you know, I hope this is something a lot of people think about. I think about it, and what I've come to is what I want to guide my responses are a sense of humanity. And, you know, so what I like to do is I like to make eye contact and have some engagement and let the person know that I see them, that they're there and they're human. And to be honest, my personal response, I'm not saying this is what everybody should do, is I say to myself, whatever they're asking for, it may not be a great solution, as I said before, but you know what? There are really important reasons they're asking for these things, and whatever's going on for them is a whole lot more painful than whatever I'm experiencing right now. And if there's any little way that I can temporarily help, I'll try to help.
Oh, okay, all right. So language skills are essential. Girls tend to be more verbal than boys. Would you agree with that? And does that have any implication?
Girls tend to be more verbal than boys. Yeah, massive generalization, but sure, on the whole. But you know, I think what's really important here is it's not just language skills. It's particular types of language skills. It's being able to use language to know what's bothering you and express it to somebody else. To know what your concerns and your needs are and let other people know. And I'm not sure boys or girls are particularly good at that these days. I think humans need a lot of practice in it. I think boys and girls are bad at it for different reasons on the whole, but everybody needs some practice. And then beyond that, once you let somebody know what's bothering you, you still got a long way to go, because you're going to speak back to me. Now I've got to use receptive language. And then we're going to try to problem solve, hopefully. A lot of linguistic back and forth. So really, you know, it's just important to know that problem solving tends to be a heavily linguistic exercise.
Right.
Which means if you've got receptive or expressive language issues, you're going to have some trouble problem solving. And we don't want people misunderstanding that you lack the will to do these things, when it may be skill, in this case, language skill.
So gender doesn't matter. Women are not better listeners than men.
Oh, I think that's true on the whole, generally on the whole, yeah. But you know, I see boys and girls, men and women, you know, struggling all of the time, you know, with managing their behavior. It just might be that their behavior takes different forms. The outgrowth of these lagging skills looks different. Boys tend to externalize, girls tend to internalize. But again, a massive overgeneralization, especially when we're much more aware these days that this is a continuum in the first place. This isn't dichotomous.
Yes, you talk about this as a continuum, whereas a lot of people...
Well, here I was talking about gender, but...
well, no, I'm sorry, but you're talking about something that's more gray as opposed to black and white. So a lot of people grew up with this idea, heaven and hell, it's black and white. You're a good person, you're a sinner, and you're advocating for something in between. Is that right? Well, would that be a liberal?
Look, I think there's few things in life that are black and white. It's sort of comforting, the notion that maybe it is, but the longer you live, the more experience you have, the more you see that there's a lot of gray in the world. And I actually think that's where a lot of people struggle, because if you tend to the black and white side of thinking, the all or none, the sort of what I would call more rigid, concrete, literal style of thinking, wow, is it hard to navigate the ambiguities of life, which the more you get around, the more you see that's where the action's at.
Could I turn to this other book that you have here, this school discipline mix? Can you explain?
Sure. It's a school discipline fix. And the reason it's a school discipline fix is it's alluding to we've got a big problem in schools.
Right.
And that is school discipline is incredibly ineffective. It doesn't work for the students to whom it is most applied. And it's also very inequitable as well. It is applied disproportionately to students of color, to students with disabilities, to students with trauma histories, and it's ineffective. And in fact, it's being involved with school discipline is linked with later juvenile justice involvement. But I'm not surprised because, again, what does school discipline look like? Suspensions, detentions, expulsions, all motivational tools. And what we know now, beyond the shadow of a doubt, this is not my opinion, this is true after probably 50 years of research at this point that's been done in this area. Kids who come in contact with school discipline frequently, they don't lack the will to behave well. What they lack are the skills to behave well. So it's no wonder traditional school discipline doesn't work. It is barking up the wrong therapeutic tree. School discipline will only work if it focuses on helping those students build the skills they lack. And so this book is, in essence, a curriculum for schools saying, hey, you want to rethink school discipline, you want to do something very different, here's a way to do it.
Well, you've opened our eyes quite a bit. We're coming to the end of our time. I just want to ask, you talk about this individually, but there are societal implications as well. What kind of societal changes are you advocating?
I actually don't think we spend much time teaching the youth of our country that it's actually really important to listen to other people. That other people have very important perspectives, that you can solve problems in mutually satisfactory ways. I actually think we raise and teach our kids to really think that might makes right, and that the bigger, stronger person is going to sort of carry the day. And so societally, what am I really advocating for? I'm advocating for teaching the next generation of adults that when there's a problem, you don't have to line up and see who's bigger and stronger. There's a different way to go about this. And if we did that, I think the ripple effects across our society would be enormous.
Oh, it's a great way to end. Stuart Ablon, the book that we're talking, the latest book we're talking about is Changeable. This is New England Authors. We record here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and broadcast on stations throughout the region. If you missed an episode, you could go to YouTube, and remember, watch locally.